Great. So we like to record these so that they can be posted later on the state's website, and folks can look at them if you weren't able to join. Great. So as I said, let's start with the presentation. I'm going to turn it over to Billy Koster and Jael Pulskamp, who are the co-chairs of this subcommittee. And I think, Billy, you're up tonight to lead us off.
Great. Thanks, David. Thanks, everyone, for being here. I know that everyone is very busy, so taking some time out of your day to sit with us, we very much appreciate, and really this is intended to get input from you all. So we're going to speak for a little bit and then really open it up for questions and comments from those who are participating. My name is Billy Koster. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Agriculture and Ecosystems Subcommittee of the Climate Council. I am the Director of Policy Planning at the Vermont Agency of Natural Resources and work on climate, energy, and land use issues there. And before I go on, Jael, would you mind just popping on and introducing yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Jael Pulskamp. I was an organic vegetable grower for 20 years until I lost my crops last year. Currently, I work for the White River Natural Resources Conservation District and co-chair the Ag and Ecosystem Subcommittee.
Thanks, Jael. So why don't we jump on to the next slide? Okay, so just to frame the conversation a little bit today, we're here seeking input on an update to the state's climate action plan. The Climate Action Plan is something that is required by the Global Warming Solutions Act, which was a piece of comprehensive climate legislation passed in 2020. That act established the Vermont Climate Council, and it's the Climate Council's responsibility to develop the initial Climate Action Plan, which came out, I think, in 2021, and then to update it on a rotating basis going forward. And the next update is due July of next year. And as you can see on the slide, there's foci both on reducing and minimizing greenhouse gas and other climate emitting pollution, on promoting storage and sequestration of carbon, and really promoting adaptation and resilience across a number of sectors. Our work is really focused on agricultural, managed forest, and natural lands, the kind of vast areas of Vermont that are our greatest strength and most effective tool in both reducing carbon in our atmosphere and building a resilient and adaptive landscape for both Vermonters and all the species that live here. So this is really important work. The work that you all have done likely for most of your lives and careers is the backbone of that. And we have been trying to work at our subcommittee level to come up with strategies that are both going to move the state's goals and objectives forward, but also support our work in a natural landscape. So next slide, please. So this is a little bit of a timeline of the process that the Climate Council is undertaking to update the Climate Action Plan. That work kicked off last summer with some public engagement and outreach opportunities and the kind of relaunching of the subcommittee process. This fall, the subcommittees have been meeting regularly to look at the existing Climate Action Plan that has over 200 recommended actions to address climate mitigation and resilience and adaptation, and to help update those actions, to identify what gaps exist, and then ideally to provide a short list of priority recommendations to the Climate Council that they can highlight for immediate action in the next iteration of the plan. So the subcommittee recommendations, preliminary priorities, will be sent over to the council in early December. And from there, the council will pick up the work and continue to engage with the public as they deliberate and ultimately issue an updated plan next summer. Next slide, please. Our subcommittee, the Agriculture and Ecosystems, had the most recommended actions in the initial Climate Action Plan. I think we had over 150 or 180 actions proposed. Those are all still part of the plan. Those will all carry forward into the update, though some of them may be modified and updated. So to get our arms around the task of prioritizing those actions, the subcommittee decided to break them up into 3 areas of focus. And those are the kind of organizing principles that we'll use for our conversation today. And those are roughly put actions that focus on greenhouse gas reductions and sequestration, actions that support adaptation, viability, recovery, and economies and workforce. The people and systems that are really important and necessary to maintain a working and natural landscape, and then climate resilient land practices that increase the value and productivity of those landscapes to work towards against climate change. Next slide, please. So today, this input session this evening is focused a little bit more towards forest land, managed forest land, and natural lands. As David said, we had a conversation that was more ag focused yesterday, but all these issues are on the table for the conversation this evening. So feel free to speak to any of the work that the subcommittee may be engaged in over the course of the evening. Next slide, please. So we're going to first start off with the greenhouse gas reduction and sequestration theme. And just to give a little preview, we'll have members of the subcommittee speak to the work that they've done under each of these 3 focus areas in identifying pathways, strategies, and priority themes to move forward to the council. We're not able to capture all of the priority actions that we're seeking to move forward in this slideshow, but we're trying to give some examples of the sorts of work that we're focused on as a way to solicit feedback and guidance from you all. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ryan Patch, one of our subcommittee members, to lead this part of the conversation.
Thanks, Billy. Good evening, everyone. My name is Ryan Patch. I work for the Vermont Agency of Agriculture and Markets. Work on climate and land use issues there. Our subtask group has been looking at, as Billy said, greenhouse gas emission reduction efforts, as well as sequestration opportunities. And one of the best ways to represent that is through the next slide that will show the land use change in forestry section of the State of Vermont's greenhouse gas emission inventory, which is published about every year. This is from July of this year and details both trackings of emissions as well as sequestration since 1990. The land use change in forestry, LUCF, is a rather unwieldy acronym, but it stands for quite a lot of land. So our forest, our ag, wetlands, settlement soils, all of those areas, as well as types of land use that exist under each one of those categories, and how they change from year to year as far as the amount of acres of one type of crop, one type of forest, etc., all go into generating the graphic you see in front of you, which is the gross emissions from all the emission sectors, which does not include forestry, and the sink and sequestration sectors, which includes forestry, agriculture, other natural lands as examples. And what we see here is we have a bit of a balance towards net emissions, not net sequestration at this time. But as Billy said, the significant amounts of forest in Vermont are a really big resource and asset to the state, and certainly when compared to many other states in the United States. Next, we'll switch to those. The next slide is a slide which will share a few of the pathways and strategies that have been discussed for both the agriculture sector and then also separately for the forestry sector, those that help either reduce emissions from ag land use practices or promote sequestration in either of those land uses. One of the most effective practices that exist is the planting of herbaceous and woody vegetation along our riparian areas. There's a program called the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, CREP, and that's probably one of the most popular examples of how farmers help plant woody stems adjacent to their surface waters. Agroforestry and silvopasture practices are really popular ideas and concepts that are beginning to be deployed in Vermont as a way to intentionally integrate woody species and trees into agricultural systems that provides benefits of shade or fodder crops to agriculture, timber crops, or other products from different types of tree species that help both increase the productivity of agricultural land and provide additional benefits for carbon sequestration. The SEEP program is a program the Agency of Ag administers, and that is one that directly helps support farmers to implement individual agronomic practices. Natural resource restoration projects have a really long and successful history in Vermont, and so identifying those programs and additional opportunities for landowners to enroll in them is certainly one that we've been looking at: river corridor easement, wetland restorations, etc. But to track how much land managers, and others are achieving, we need to make sure we have a good accounting metrics in place to make sure we can actually track what is implemented and make sure that credit is given to either side of the ledger, whether it is reducing the emissions or increasing the sequestration. A payment for ecosystem services program has been developed and implemented for agriculture. It is something that once a farmer reaches a particular level of management, they can receive enhancement payments from NRCS, and so discussion through one of the NRCS programs, and so discussion of how a program like that can be extended to include forest landowners and others is a topic of discussion, and that CSP program might be a good opportunity there. As well as, just those management practices which can help maintain or increase forest carbon storage. Lots of opportunities in that space as well. So just a brief snapshot of some of the pathways and strategies that are being discussed. The initial climate action plan, as Billy said, has many, many more, but these are the ones that are rising to the top in discussions in the sub-task group. And I will pass the microphone back for the next. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Ryan. So the task group leader of this next theme is home with family duty this evening. So I'm going to pinch hit for him and run through the next group of strategies that focus on adaptation, viability, recovery, economies, and workforce. So if you could go on to that slide, please. Let's see. So there's a number of these that hit on several different aspects of our working in natural lands economy and the workforce that Vermont needs to sustain those activities into the future, and support for the managers and stewards of those lands. The first one is really broadly focused on sustaining and enhancing the health of our landscape to both support natural communities and adapt to climate change. And there's a number of actions that fall under this strategy of increasing technical assistance, capacity, education, and resources to support those land managers, owners, and planners. As many of you know, making sure you have the right resources and practices and information to do the work that you need to manage your lands or sustain the resources that you're managing for is complicated. It's ever evolving. So there's been a number of actions developed to help support increased capacity in that arena. The second one listed in this slide is to support the viability of those operations, to make sure that they have the resources, information, and are making informed decisions to make sure that they can sustain local markets and maintain the viability of their enterprises. This is going to require partnership at all levels of government, across private sector, and really is going to require connecting a lot of dots to maximize these outcomes. So there's a number of strategies and actions in the initial plan that focuses on this. And the task group is in the process of whittling those down to a handful of priorities to move forward to the council. Next slide, please. This next pathway focuses on growing and connecting local and sustainable natural and working lands, economies, markets, and food systems while ensuring and providing equitable access to those things. The initial climate action plan included a number of strategies and actions that really focused on growing those markets and making those connections across supply chain and through connecting producers to consumers, focused not only on agricultural and food products, but also on forest products. And that work is continuing. And again, the group is looking to kind of prioritize what they feel like are the most ripe actions under those pathways for the next 5-year duration of the plan. There's also pathways and strategies focused on simply supporting and empowering farmers, foresters, and land workers to bring renewable energy into their operations, and to do it in a way that is less impactful on those operations, and ideally using durable wood products and things of that nature to reduce the state's carbon emissions. Next slide, please. And this last one is focused on education. It's thinking about strategies and actions that bring resources and education in an equitable way, not only to folks in the education system, but those working the land and the next generation workforce that's going to be necessary to support it. Let's see. So I think that's the last one we have under this theme. And I know that Andrew, so can you go to the next slide, please? Andrew Milken is another member of our subcommittee who is one of the task leads for this third group. And Andrew, if you're willing, would love for you to run through the work that your group's been undertaking.
Thank you, Billy. I'm happy to do that. And yes, Andrew Milliken, I'm a conservation biologist and part of the Agriculture and Ecosystems Subcommittee, and been working for several weeks now on trying to prioritize strategies and actions and think of additional potential actions under this broad category of climate resilient land use practices, which also really includes restoration and conservation. And next slide, please. So within that larger category, I mean, Billy just mentioned education as part of the task group that he was referencing, and that is also an important part of this work for climate resilient land use practices. And this strategy is really about trying to increase that technical assistance and the capacity to deliver that to a variety of audiences, but particularly to municipal and forest landowners, planners, and a more general category of what we're calling land and water caretakers, those that are out there managing, restoring, and taking care of the land in a way that is adjusting to a changing climate. As part of that, really trying to promote and incentivize climate adaptation forest management. One example action, and there's under each of these, if we gave you the full list, there would be 3 or 4 prioritized actions, but we're just giving you some examples. And the example here is just supporting enhancing support funding for technical assistance and getting educational materials and outreach out there to farmers and foresters and land and water caretakers. And we want to make sure throughout all of this that we're bringing in a diversity of perspectives, including indigenous knowledge and traditional ecological knowledge. And that it's just as important as delivering this is really monitoring the effectiveness of this technical assistance and adapting and making it more effective in future. So trying to reach broadly across these audiences to deliver these messages. The second overall strategy is promoting funding for nature-based solutions and traditional ecological knowledge and indigenous knowledge. And the way we as a task group thought about this is we thought about nature-based solutions really as the suite of conservation and restoration actions to help sustain healthy ecosystems and natural communities that can help us be more resilient and adapt to climate change, as well as mitigating climate change directly. And we throughout this talked about the importance of that the nature-based solutions that we work on are informed by and braided. The knowledge is braided with the traditional ecological knowledge and indigenous knowledge, and that's built into state planning efforts. And one example action on this particular strategy is developing financial mechanisms, and you can see some of those listed there, to help lower the risk of capital being invested in nature-based solutions projects like restoration and conservation of forests and wetlands and floodplains and riparian areas. Next slide, please. Really important as a strategy as we went through this was that we're really thinking about the opportunity for natural lands to play this role, and working lands, including farms and forests, to play this role in not only addressing climate change, but continuing to support biodiversity and forest health and water quality. So what is the intersection that from these actions, what can we do, what actions can we take to actually try to support all of these outcomes? And one example action is supporting Vermont Fish and Wildlife and Parks and Recreation, and setting up objectives to improve forest health and water quality and biodiversity on state lands, and also doing that through the use value appraisal process. And then also enhancing the adoption of these objectives through outreach to a number of audiences, including municipal planners. And again, that making sure that these objectives are informed by traditional ecological knowledge. And the next strategy that we worked on and prioritized was utilizing these nature-based solutions to increase flood resilience. And don't have to tell this audience about the importance of doing that based on what, not only the flood resilience over the past few years, but also the flip side, the droughts that have occurred in previous years, and how can we use nature-based solutions to increase the resilience of natural communities and human communities by working on nature-based solutions in those areas. And one very specific type of action that is listed here is expanding support and education for riparian buffers and floodplain enhancements, with the goal of increasing the amount of vegetation and biodiversity in riparian areas and floodplains, and that helps buffer floods, addresses droughts, and also sequesters carbon through the increased trees and other vegetation. Next slide, thank you. As we thought about nature-based solutions and restoration and conservation actions for climate change and biodiversity and water quality, part of that was really thinking about how we should strategically take those conservation actions in terms of where we do what. And we're very fortunate in this state to have a lot of thought has gone into this type of strategic conservation design. And this is really consistent with what's been going on at the federal level, and that I've had a pleasure to work on for many years through the 30 by 30 work, Conserving and Restoring America the Beautiful, and in the state with the Vermont Conservation Design, acting as a guiding plan, and partnerships like the Staying Connected Initiative really helping to put it on the ground. So a specific action that fits under this strategy is that working through conservation and restoration efforts, we really want to try to allow for at least 9% of Vermont's forests to become or be maintained as older growth forests. And that would also relate directly to this strategic conservation, in that we're doing that in the places where it makes the most sense in terms of the forest blocks and connecting corridors that have been identified in the Vermont Conservation Design. And as part of that, and really important to achieving that goal, is that we need to be working really closely with the Forest Service to achieve that goal on national forest lands. And really importantly, that we are fully aware of and protecting sacred sites as part of that forest conservation effort. And the last strategy and action I'll mention is a little bit more specific and really just trying to make sure that as we are trying to increase the amount of renewable energy in the state, that we are doing that in a way that does not adversely impact our natural and working lands. And to do that, we really need to think about how to focus efforts for solar and wind and other renewables in already developed areas, on buildings, on parking lots, and specifically really avoid these important natural areas, and certainly minimizing or eliminating forest clearing for renewables, as well as taking up prime farmland, as we discussed yesterday. And I think that's it.
Great. Thank you, Andrew, very much. So this is just really, some good representative examples of the sort of work that the subcommittee's on. I think it's interesting that the initial climate action plan was developed before the kind of recent significant flood events we've had over the last 2 years. I know that there has been some work to help support working in natural lands in the aftermath of those events, but those are places where we'd love to get some impact from this group on how we can do more to support the viability and resilience in the face of continued flooding. But now I think I'll pass it back over to David, and he can help facilitate through the open conversation.
Thanks, Billy, and thanks everyone for that helpful presentation. So, excuse me, as Billy said, that's the overview of the kinds of things this group's working on, particularly as it relates to natural lands and forestry issues. And as Billy said, if you came in a little bit late, there was a similar conversation like this about agriculture yesterday. And if folks really want to talk about that, that's fine, but we're really trying to focus in on natural lands and forestry and related issues today. Okay, so these are the kinds of questions that could be really helpful. And I think maybe even Evan will drop them in the chat in just a second. Before we get going, I want to do two things. One, I'm curious who's in the room. And so I'm just going to do a quick, just give me 1 second, a quick Zoom poll about, how would you describe your affiliation? Feel free. I know some people wear lots of different hats, but if you had to say, what's your sort of most logical affiliation for this conversation that we're having tonight, be interested to see who's in the room. So I'll just give it a moment. Go ahead and answer that Zoom poll. And then we'll go on with our conversation. Thanks, folks. Most of you have answered. I'll just give it a second more if you haven't had a chance to click on it. Should be right on your Zoom screen if you want to take a peek at this. Okay. All right. So you should be able to see the results. We've got a really nice mix, bunch of folks from the forestry sector, folks from the government, a few farmers, a few environmental folks, interested citizens, and some other, right? So a really nice mix. And so that brings me to my next point, which is these are issues that are really tricky issues. It's okay if we have some really different views about them or somewhat different views. So my only request tonight as we get going in this conversation is just show the respect to others and their views that you'd want them to show to you. So that's my first request. And depending on how it goes tonight, just share the floor. Let's make sure if you have something you want to share, let's make sure there's space to do that. We also have multiple members of the subcommittee here. And so if there's some questions you have for subcommittee members, let's collect a couple of those. And then I'll call on subcommittee members to see if we can provide some answers in real time to some of the questions. Okay, so best way to get my attention, everybody's attention, is to raise your hand in the Zoom world. So if you'd like to answer one of these questions about what's resonating most, what might be missing, some important details you didn't really see that you'd be interested to see, some thoughts about who this group should be talking to, go ahead and raise your hands, just like what Ashley and Lee are doing. Feel free to use the chat, but I get a little bit nervous when there's a lot of activity in the chat. So feel free to use it. Just let's not have a parallel conversation going. Great. Okay, so Ashley, you're up first. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, perfectly.
Thank you for having this, and please forgive me because I may have missed something. Maybe you addressed this. What I'm wondering, I know that there is obviously a focus on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, increasing sequestration. I'm really curious about proforestation and what you're doing to enable forest owners to practice proforestation. And I'm thinking specifically about the use value appraisal program. And I think that, there were some changes made in the not too distant past that didn't move far enough in that direction at all. And I'm wondering if there will be an element, and if there isn't, I would encourage there to be a specific recommendation to allow a no-cut option for forest owners as part of the UVA program.
Thank you, Ashley. And before I have folks answer sort of where the subcommittee's conversation is going on this, let's take a couple more hands, but I don't want to lose track of that point. So thanks for that comment. And let's circle back to subcommittee members in just a moment. Lee Shen, go ahead, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
So you mentioned, or maybe it wasn't you, it was Andrew Milliken, limiting forest clearing for renewables. Does that include biofuels and wood burning power plants? Because wood burning power plants, like the one in Burlington, and another one is being proposed for Vermont, hasn't opened yet, but it's being pushed through the approval process really fast. What happens with those is they cut all the remaining trees that are not deemed to be good timber trees, and they take all the deadwood off the forest floor off, and both of those things really increase carbon release from forests unnecessarily. Wood burning plants are less efficient than coal burning plants. If we're going to burn things, let's burn something efficient. And I just think that biofuels are not compatible with this.
Thanks for the comment, Lee. And again, let's circle back in a bit to the subcommittee and see if there's how that conversation's happened, if it has happened at all. I appreciate the comment. Walter?
Yeah, good evening, everybody. Thank you for those. I really enjoyed that overview. I found my head nodding kind of throughout at the breadth of topics that were covered from, intersection with biodiversity, Vermont conservation design, education. What I didn't hear that I'm really interested in is a sense of watershed scale planning, because I think so many of these things, from sort of wild conserved lands to working forests to working farms to obviously the hydrologic systems, all come together. And I just haven't heard a lot of emphasis on that. And I wonder if that's on the minds of the folks in the state who are working on strategic planning initiatives. So watershed scale is my interest in really helping people cultivate a watershed identity that links them to their neighboring towns.
Thanks, Walter. I'm glad you brought that up. Again, I'm taking some notes right now, and so we can remember things that were said and circle back. Let's take a couple more hands, and then I really do want to invite folks from the subcommittee to chime in on some of this stuff. Kurt, you're up next.
Thanks, David. It's nice to follow Walt. I too enjoyed the presentation and the thinking behind it. Couple points that come to my mind. I was impressed with the I guess, the pathway or the goal that talked about managing lands for biodiversity, forest health, and water quality. Walt and I had the privilege of attending the UN biodiversity meeting last month in Colombia. And one of the key themes in that event was what they call co-benefits, and really seeking solutions to problems that recognize how interdependent all these systems are. So not just thinking about climate change in isolation from biodiversity protection, to forest resilience, for instance. So I think thinking kind of across systems and looking for actions and solution that benefit kind of multiple systems. My hands off, not hands off, but appreciate the attention to that in your planning. There was, a lot of attention to maintaining, expanding natural and working lands, biodiversity, forest health, and so forth. One thing I did not hear mention of is invasive species management. As you know, I think Vermont considers invasive species one of the second leading threat to biodiversity. That's kind of known internationally too. So I'm kind of wondering what level of attention in this plan should be devoted to biodiversity by addressing more actively the threat that invasive species brings.
Thanks, Kurt. How about I take two more comments and then I'm going to push it back to subcommittee members. I'll remind folks of what we've been talking about. Appreciate that comment, Kurt, or those comments. Ken, you're up next.
Thanks for taking my call. I'm part of a family business that's been operating in the forest industry for going on 70 years. Our family's been part of this working lands since 1880. And I think it's important to remember in terms of the long-term picture, is that we as a society need to consider that the wood that's growing here is doing a lot of good things, such as conserving the carbon, but we as a society are using a fair amount of wood. And we need to remember that we have to balance those two. If we decide through our management practices that we are going to swing away towards not, then that wood is going to need to come from some other part of the world. And we need to be cognizant of the fact that there's a balance at play here. And we need to encourage those people that are part of this forest community that have been doing this over these many generations can continue to do so in a way that's sustainable for them. Thank you.
Thanks, Ken. Thanks for the long view. Henry? Hang on one second, Henry. You're still on mute. Hang on one sec. Almost there. Still not. I'll give you 1 sec. There's that little audio button down at the bottom of the Zoom screen. Maybe you have an iPad or something. And you've got to click on that audio button so it unmutes. Or maybe it's your phone. There'll be a little audio button at the bottom. I wish I could do it for you, but I can't. It's the Zoom infuriating issue. Well, Henry's working on that. And Henry, you will solve it. I have full confidence. A couple things. I want to prep up the subcommittee members to react to a couple questions that came up, right? There was a question about the sort of concept of proforestation and a specific recommendation around the use value appraisal program and allowing a no-cut option, right? So there's a specific mention about that. Hey, Henry, you're off.
So I just have a comment that, and maybe it's kind of hidden in the details, but your 3 major topic areas is not addressing cooling. And all the things we do with the environment to sequester tend to cool as well. But the number of days of green cover that we have over our landscape has a direct cooling effect, which is powerful, and it happens now rather than waiting until we've rebalanced the carbon cycle, which will take hundreds of years. So
Great. So
just a comment.
yeah, the benefit of cooling from having forest cover. Yeah.
Forest, and to be true for ag fields too. So within the forest, as long as we're being pro for forest, then that's probably happening automatically. But in the ag sector, there's a lot of bare ground in our ag practices.
Got it. Okay. Thanks, Henry. So before I bounce back to Lee, and I see your hands up, you just give me a second, Lee. There's a couple specific things folks put out, and I'd be interested in subcommittee members who want to jump on any of these or can. One is about that, what I just mentioned on proforestation and specific changes to the use value appraisal program, maybe a no-cut option. That's one thing. The other was a question about on the comment on getting the balance right on renewable energy, not impacting natural working lands. Does that include the impact on natural working lands from biofuels? So that's the second thing. A third thing was, what about watershed scale planning, right? Is there something to say about that? Is that in there? Interesting comment. A few other things I'll just mention. One is about invasive species management. And the importance of that around biodiversity. And then finally, this idea of balance between, demand for wood products. And if Vermont is taking a lot of area off the table for production of wood products, like what's the impact of that on communities and the reality of where that wood would actually come from if demand is still there. And then this final comment about cooling. So those are some of the things that came up. And I'm curious, working group members, Billy, Jael, and others who are here on the call from the working group, you think about some of those. Is there anything you want to say about how those issues have come up so far in the discussions? Billy?
Sure, I can take an initial stab and would encourage others to chime in. So the issue of the eligibility of unmanaged or passively managed or managing towards old forest conditions and use value, that was a recommendation in the initial climate action plan. Some of what was recommended has been implemented through changes to the use value program. I just put the full action from the initial plan in the chat for people to read. We haven't discussed modifying that action so far, but certainly would welcome input on that. To Kurt's point regarding invasives, absolutely invasives are a risk to forest health and natural community health and are going to be a more prevalent impact as the climate and conditions change. There was a brief action in the initial plan related to invasives management that I put in the chat as well. Again, that issue hasn't risen up as a priority, I don't believe, so far in our conversations, but that's certainly one that we can think more about after today. And then before I go on, any other thoughts from subcommittee members on those two topics, kind of the role of old forest and UVA and invasive species management?
Yeah, I saw Andrew come off and Stephen has his hand up. So Stephen, you want to jump in first, and then Andrew, if you want to jump in on those,
Sure. Thank you, David and Billy. So just echoing what I've heard, I agree that the single most important action we can take to mitigate and adapt is to protect our mature forests and to manage all our forests for old growth characteristics, even those that are under commercial management for timber extraction. I'd really love to, and we've talked about this, and it's an ongoing discussion within the subcommittee, protection of forests on public land. And we also in discussion advocate for UVA reform that allows for passive management I've heard a lot of feedback that the 30% of ecologically sensitive is a difficult program to get enrolled in. And, with still 96% of the forest in the state in private hands, I think we could certainly do better with allowing for passive management for at least some portion, if not all of a homeowner's desire to manage it that way. I'd also advocate for creating an ecological forest management certification program for UVA enrollees. Tony D'Amato's here. He's been on the research and development of things and might be able to speak to that for us. But such program would allow us to commercially manage and at the same time be developing biodiversity, complexity of structure and age in our forests, and greater climate resilience built in through that type of management. And I'll leave it for there now. For now, thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, so those are the kinds of conversations that are going on in the subcommittee right now. Andrew, did you want to jump in on some of that as well?
Yeah, I'm going to just respond to three things that I heard. First of all, related to invasive species, I think that's a really important point, and specifically related to the climate plan and addressing biodiversity, that we are thinking about how climate change is increasing the opportunity for invasive species to move into Vermont that they wouldn't have had without climate change, and really trying to address that issue. So that's one thing. Relative to co-benefits, I completely agree. That's a really important part of this, is how can we achieve these multiple benefits through the same set of conservation actions. And related to that, yes, on the watershed scale planning, we did actually on our call yesterday talk a bit about that, and the additional factor that a lot of pretty powerful conservation action is happening through watershed-based organizations and watershed and water quality funding, and that climate change and water quality and watershed actions should really be brought together and take advantage of that work. The other thing I'll just mention is our particular task group did also flag biomass and biofuels as an important issue for our subcommittee to address. And I know that we're planning to do that. I don't know that we have specific strategies and actions around it yet, but it's been flagged as something for us to work on. That's it. Thanks.
Thanks, Andrew. That was really helpful. Billy or other members of the subcommittee, are there other things you wanted to mention based on what you've heard so far?
I think that covers most of the comments we've gotten so far. I guess, the only thing that I would flag is that the subcommittee is still very much in our active work. The task groups have been working independently of each other. We're just starting to bring recommendations back to the full group to consider. So, we have a range of perspectives on the subcommittee. So while, certain task groups or individuals are interested in certain outcomes, it remains to be seen whether there'll be consensus around bringing any of those actions forward. So these are all great updates and ideas that you're hearing from subcommittee members today, but what ultimately gets moved forward from the subcommittee as priority recommendations to the council is far from being finalized. So certainly encourage you all to stay engaged in our process and continue to kind of participate and provide feedback as we work through that process over the next few weeks.
Yeah. Yeah, and we'll say a little bit more about next steps in a moment. Li Shen, you put your hand back up. Did you have another point you wanted to make?
I do. You mentioned invasive species. You mentioned forest regeneration. You mentioned proforestation. None of that is so. Forest reforestation and regeneration, and that is badly affected by the number of deer we have in this state. The deer, according to some biologists, are bringing forests not only in Vermont, but in most of the Northeast to the verge of collapse as we know them, according to articles I have read written by reputable scientists. So, and the deer are certainly doing incredible damage to forest regeneration in our part of Vermont. So they need to be addressed. You can't have healthy forests with this many deer. So please, can you talk to the Fish and Wildlife people about doing something about it?
Thanks, Lee. Appreciate that comment. Kate, you're up next.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. Thanks for this opportunity and thanks for holding this input session tonight. I admit I'm kind of woefully behind the times in terms of the planning process that has already happened. So I appreciate that the slides tonight will be available for review. Just a couple of kind of initial thoughts for me. So I am the executive director of Vermont Woodlands Association. We are a statewide nonprofit organization that works to educate and advocate for stewardship, use, and enjoyment of our forests. And a lot of the work that we do is really working with private landowners. And I guess I mentioned the organization really because, I think a lot of what I've been hearing tonight is part of this conversation is predicated on, engaging private landowners. And as we all know, Vermont's forests here in Vermont, we're about 80% privately owned. 2/3 of that is owned by individuals. So people just like you and me, families, individuals, who are making the decisions on the land and, have really, frankly, over many, many decades, contributed to the matrix and sort of the whole array of forest habitats and forest types that we get to enjoy today here in Vermont. And so all of those individual decisions, I think, are really important, just in terms of keeping our forests diverse, like we mentioned, biodiversity, and allowing us to enjoy all of the different values that we hold here for our forests in Vermont. But one of the things that I think is kind of the elephant in the room, and I haven't heard, and I apologize if I missed it, but is I think the real issue here that we have in Vermont around keeping our forests economically viable to prevent them from being converted to other uses, such as development. And so, I don't know if the subcommittee has talked about that, but we when I look at that initial graph that you showed in the beginning in the PowerPoint, there was a lot of talk about, I guess it was carbon sinks, and sort of the net emissions over time. But I think I would be curious, and I don't want to make an assumption here, but I'd really be curious to see how that correlates to our forest cover loss here in Vermont from development. We know that parcels are getting smaller. We know that land, has continuously been developed. So I think that's definitely, a part of the equation here. And obviously conservation, and we mentioned the 30 by 30 is one part of that, but keeping forests as forests, I think really requires us to keep all of the tools in our toolbox. So as Aldo Leopold would say, we need to keep every cog in the wheel. And that means that not only, do we need to work towards forest conservation, but we need to be able to, support landowners in keeping forest land ownership a viable option. And that means, allowing landowners to make, the whole diversity of decisions about stewardship and use of their forests based on their management goals and their own personal needs. So I guess I just, curious for the subcommittee's thoughts on, sort of, how the work, like what strategies and what we can do to sort of help keep forest land ownership a viable option here in Vermont. As we know, many communities, I know here in Tunbridge, we saw about a 12 to 14% increase in our property taxes. And so, there's, as we mentioned earlier, there's a whole lot of different competing issues, I think, that are at play. And so, again, I just go back to Aldo Leopold and keeping every cog in the wheel, I think is a really important strategy, and especially as it relates to keeping our forests forested.
Thanks, Kate. I really appreciate that comment. And before I know the subcommittee has things to say about that. Before I do that, let's grab Sam Lincoln's hand and quickly Ashley's, and then I know that there's thoughts about that very last point you make, Kate. Sam?
Thank you. Appreciate it, the opportunity to speak. Those of us that work in the forest and own forest land, we really value and care about the changing ecosystem. We work in it every day. We're implementing management plans, protecting the resource and sensitive landscape features. We're on the front lines of climate change as our family businesses are impacted by every winter day that's not as cold, every severe storm. It directly and immediately impacts us. So we take this conversation very seriously. Our businesses bring millions of dollars from the global economy to local family landowners in a really important supply chain that provides and produces essential goods. The plans that I'm seeing generally don't address the existing pressures and threats to the system that holds our forests together now. As Ken said, and Kate just did, our society consumes a lot of forest products. Each sawmill and every other facility that uses raw materials from the forest that closes, to add value, we have to it immediately adds transportation costs, exports jobs, and that reduces the return to Vermont's forests. We've been at the table in these discussions for years, talking about protecting the resource and the ecosystem, identifying the pressures on forest landowners and the forest economy. And at times they've been dismissed by legislators as being a non-issue because we're people that work in the forest, we're loggers, we're not valued in this discussion. I think these actions need to be more based in addressing the economic realities and pressures faced by the forest and natural landowners and the workforce and systems that surround them. The rural landowners I work for need revenue to pay land ownership costs, and that's not addressed as a top priority, just as Kate said, as far as I can tell. And that is an ongoing, real-time, severe situation that's happening in rural Vermont. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. And one of the things we can talk about tonight is, remember that second task group of this subcommittee, which is entirely focused on the viability and the adaptation of these sectors, right? If it's not hitting the nail on the head in terms of these issues of the pressures that Kate and Sam are talking about, let's think about what would need to be in there if it's not in there now. Let me take Ashley, and then let's circle back to the folks on the subcommittee. You can talk to these issues that Kate and Sam are bringing up. Ashley.
Yeah, thank you. I think that one way you can support, the state can support forest landowners is to also support those who would like to keep their forests as forests by not logging them. You know, my family was in the UVA program for years and years, and my mom badly wants to support carbon sequestration, biodiversity, flood mitigation, and can't do that through the UVA program. Even with the changes, her parcel won't qualify, and those changes seemed almost designed to ensure that parcels will not qualify, or that just a tiny number of parcels will qualify. So that's, to me, low-hanging fruit. You know, I think you have a forest owner who wants to support the purported goals of the climate action plan. Gosh, you know, give them a break on their property taxes, right?
Thanks, Ashley. Yeah, building off that point you made earlier. Yeah. So I see Stephen has his hand up, and other subcommittee members, I welcome you to chime in too on this sort of latest set of conversations about pressures on forest land and foresters. Stephen, do you want to jump in on that?
Sure, as long as nobody else is ready to go right now. So I just wanted to preface by saying that, like many farmers, I also co-manage 200 acres of forest. Many of the conserved farms, about 50% of the conserved farms in the state are actually about 50% forested. And our forest is enrolled in current use and also in the Conservation Stewardship Program. I just wanted to assure folks that on some of these points I'll just mention that these are in discussion. These are things that we're talking about. I don't know what's going to make it through, but we just want to give you the encouragement that these points you're raising are on the table with the subcommittee. So one would be a moratorium on burning biomass for electricity and heat on municipal and industrial scale, moratorium on biofuels, particularly imported. Really, one thing as a farmer that I've been stressing is the need for research and development into biofuels and how they could fit into organic regenerative systems on farms in the state and increase farm viability. And also, you know, promotion of agroforestry on farms, but also recognizing that agroforestry is really a cross sector between ag and forestry, and a place where we can see a lot more kind of a blurring and blending and braiding of those lines as we go forward. You know, to the point of the industry itself, just recognizing that the forestry sector is under economic duress and under, you know, on the ropes and on the front line of climate change, just in the same way that we talk about the dairy industry and ag in general, and that the forestry sector certainly deserves and needs just as much of the types of supports that the state currently and the federal government currently offer to the ag sector to move more towards a more regenerative, relocalized model and a viable model where people can earn a living wage, and young people will want to view forest service and logging as viable career paths, and also agree that let's stop importing old growth timber from British Columbia to build our new homes and decks and whatnot. We really need to invest in a relocalized wood products industry and bring that consciousness to the consumer the same way that we've pushed local foods. And yes, to watershed planning and bioregional systems thinking, and recognizing that in a way we're already set up to do that perfectly with our 14 conservation districts. So let's really empower them with more funding for existing programs.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah.
Yeah,
Billy,
I'll just jump in quickly and acknowledge that the focus that really is targeted at some of these economic and viability issues was the one that I had to pinch hit for, and I probably did a poor job covering those themes. So apologize for that, and encourage folks to look back at those slides and dig into the work of that task group, because I know there is a real focus on lifting up both farm and forest economies and trying to think about novel ways to support those, appreciating that there's been an incredible amount of stress on both those sectors over the past few years. I know one idea is trying to consider how to monetize some of the ecosystem benefits that managed and unmanaged forest lands provide the state, and providing direct payments to landowners for that, because I just want to be clear that many of the values that actually associated with forests around clean air, clean water, flood resilience, those are delivered by forests that are managed as well as unmanaged. So that is work that is happening at the subcommittee level. We just don't really have that level of detail shared with you today.
Thanks, Billy. Yeah. All right. So, we've been through a bunch. There's been some stuff in the chat. I've noticed that. I'm just looking at the chat right now. I noticed Margot, for instance, put in a note about an important tool is land use planning at a regional scale, loving that watershed scale, super important. Great. Virginia, go ahead, please.
Yeah, hi. Let's see, get this video going here. So I'd just like to put in a word for the information and advice coming down to the municipal level. So I'm on the Planning Commission in Richmond. We have a lot of forest land in Richmond. We have, I think as planning commissioners, we have kind of a limited understanding on how to engage with all the private owners of that forest land and what the role is of any kind of, zoning or other municipal strategies for making the balance between telling people what to do with their land, which comes up often in our conversations, and trying to achieve some of these planning goals. So just want to encourage you to, when you do develop information and resources, getting it to the municipal level is going to be really handy. I have looked at some of the information that's come out of like Act 171, the studies that have come to absolutely no conclusion, basically, because none of the stakeholders can agree. And that makes it difficult. We read those studies and we think, well, where are we going with this? So anyway, a word for the municipal level. Thanks.
Thanks, Virginia. I'm glad you brought that up. That's where the rubber meets the road for sure. Sarah, you're up next.
Hi. Yes, I hope that my my internet will hold up here. It's been kind of unstable lately. But thank you so much to the organizers for collecting public input. I'm here on behalf of BNRC, and I just wanted to quickly recognize that there are several important pieces of legislation that are critical to implementing various ag and ecosystems CAP strategies and actions, which include Act 181 or the Act 250 reform, Act 59 or the 30 by 30, as well as Act 121 or the Blood Safety Act. And we believe it's critical to prioritize their implementation because they touch on so many different components of the CAP. And we also understand that that capacity is needed for effective implementation. And we wanted to recognize that Act 181 implementation in particular will require assistance from the regional planning commissions. And we think it's important to elevate the need for RPCs to have adequate funding in order to hire natural resource staff to help with the overall implementation. So if anyone on the subcommittee, any of the subcommittee members could speak on those issues, that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, your internet held up. Well done. Great. So interesting point there around perhaps key climate strategies are actually implementing things that are on the books, but require resources and implementation support. Billy, were you trying to say something? Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to point out that I think all of those recently enacted laws that Sarah just spoke to were in one way or another recommendations of this subcommittee in the initial climate action plan. So it was good to see that those kind of moved from a recommendation to an action. And yeah, certainly there's a lot of details that still need to be worked out and resources needed to implement that work. And I do think that is in part why the charge by the council to subcommittees for this update is to really identify a short list of implementable priorities that are feasible and have high co-benefits and are equitable, because there is limited capacity and resources to do this work. So really, we need to identify the actions that have the most impact, that have the broadest co-benefits, supporting Vermonters, land stewards, clean air, clean water, as we're maintaining our climate goals. So thanks for raising that.
Yeah, that's great. And just a note on the sort of process this time around that the council is going to do, which is, and the subcommittees are being asked to do, which is, as Billy says, there's hope that a handful of the most pressing actions can be lifted up and put right at the front of the climate action plan. All the other actions will also be in there. So nothing's getting lost. It's just there's a recognition that if you want to catch the attention of legislators and the administration and others, you need to put some stuff right up in front to say, we really, really want to pay attention to this. All that other stuff is also important, and it'll be in the plan as well. Okay. All right. So Zach Porter, go ahead, and then we'll start taking some steps to finish up here tonight.
Thanks, David. This is Zach Porter. I'm Executive Director of Standing Trees and based in Montpelier, Vermont. This is somewhat of a wrapping up question. I might have missed this early on, but I was wondering if you and subcommittee members could help us understand the process here. And one thing I'm curious about is there a public comment window with a deadline by which this committee is asking for feedback? Is there a document that the public can respond to that describes in more detail the proposals that the committee is considering? I heard a number of times tonight that there's more detail out there, but that it wasn't shared this evening. And I couldn't locate any documents online that would describe that additional detail. So I was just hoping that you might share some of that. And thank you to the committee for the presentation tonight and for this opportunity to follow along with what you're working on.
Thanks, Zach. Those are great process questions. And I'm happy to take those right now. And there is a concluding slide that we have. But Billy, did you want to say a word about that process?
Yeah, so just so you understand, Zach and others, the way we kind of manage this process under a relatively short time frame is that we extracted from the initial climate action plan all of the pathway strategies and recommendations that we understood to be under the purview of this subcommittee. And then from those, we kind of organized and under those 3 principles. I believe there are spreadsheets of all those pathway strategies and actions posted in association with our subcommittee on the Climate Council's webpage. And if not, we can get them up. And then the task groups have been going through those using a template form to kind of update and prioritize those. Some of that information was shared at our last subcommittee meeting. I don't know that we got the information early enough to post it with the agenda, but it should be up now. If not, we'll get it up, and we'll continue to post those materials at each one of our meetings. So it's all going to be available for folks ideally in advance of our next meeting, which is, I believe, next Thursday, the 20th. Excuse me, the 21st. We have multiple opportunities for public input at our meetings. And as far as like a comment portal, I do not know how the council is handling that this time around. I think the one notable difference is that subcommittees are providing recommendations to the Climate Council, about 6 months prior or 5 months prior to the update of the plan. Last time we were getting them those recommendations, near the very end of the process. So there's going to be significant public process at the council level once they get those preliminary recommendations from the subcommittees. So there'll be lots of opportunities to engage from that point forward. And all sorts of good stuff going in the chat.
Yeah, Evan's doing a nice job.
Meetings, the comment form. So long way of saying that if we certainly intend to share all this stuff if we haven't already, and there'll be lots of opportunities for folks to weigh in on the work we're doing.
Thanks, Billy. That's great. That's great. And the only thing I'll add to that is just there isn't a specific time window in this stage for folks to provide comment to the subcommittees. These input sessions are a key piece. Participating, observing and participating in public comment in the subcommittee meetings is another opportunity. And then, as Billy says, there's going to be significant process around when the council tries to consolidate all this. And there'll be, unlike last time around 4 years ago, there'll be a draft consolidated climate action plan that goes out to public comment. And that's expected to happen late March, April. So that's a step that didn't occur last time and is definitely happening this time. Comments that get put in that comment form get summarized and sent to subcommittees or the council, wherever they're designed. And folks, if you see next week, there's a council meeting on the 20-something, I'll get it wrong, on the 20th, and in the morning. And one of the things we're going to do is go over sort of high level what we're hearing in all these input sessions. So there's a quick turnaround that's happening on a lot of this feedback right now, getting pushed out of the subcommittees as they finish their work, and even to the council next Wednesday. And so you're welcome, folks, to participate there. Now, I understand there's somebody on the phone who is interested in making a comment. And so please just unmute yourself and jump in. I'd welcome you to do that. Sometimes if you're having a hard time unmuting or you're double muted, *6 will work too. But if you're on the phone.
My name is Mike Bald.
Yeah,
my name is Mike. I'm in Royalton. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I do. Go ahead.
All right. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity and thanks for the review here tonight. I do want to say that my comment overlaps, and someone pointed it out earlier, that forestry and agriculture and land use is pretty interwoven and open to a lot of interpretation and definitions and so forth. For the record, I want you all to know the invasives of concern are already here. We are, in fact, decades behind in realizing and acknowledging that. I do this professionally. I'm a little bit of a outside the norm in Vermont, but I work basically Cape Cod coastal all the way to the Adirondacks, all over New England, and even over in Ireland. So, I mean, you can't wave the red flag enough about invasive species with recreation and any land disturbance and leaf blowers for that matter. I mean, I have full employment and there's easily room for another dozen people to do what I do. I do not use pesticides. I would ask you you probably don't have time tonight, but I would ask you what the group is doing, to my point made, I don't know, 1 or 2 years ago about pesticide reductions. If you want to solve climate change, just stop using pesticides. I mean, there's a 5-fold CO2 footprint every time somebody starts spraying or dabbing or whatever they're doing. But here in the state, I get the message regularly all the time, hey, Mike, we're looking for somebody to do barberry in Putney, or this here or that there, Japanese knotweed. But we can't find anybody from the agencies or the county forester or whoever who won't insist on using chemicals. It's beyond insane. I've given up on the legislature. I've actually given up on a lot of the intelligent people in this state, because they all push, the great majority of them, got to use chems, we can't get it done, it's beyond hopeless, blah, blah, blah. So it's frustrating for me, but I mean, I'm fully employed, and I'm happy to train other people doing this kind of work. But again, finding labor or anybody that's interested in doing it is incredibly difficult. I train people for free, and they don't even want free training, so whatever. I think that's my comment. So again, if you can say anything about pesticide reductions tonight, please do. I'd be interested. Thanks again.
Thanks, Mike. I'm glad you're able to join. And yeah, doubling down on those concerns around invasives and bringing in the issue of pesticides. I'm not sure what this group has. Billy, a quick reaction, or Jael, how that shows up in this subgroup's work.
It's definitely come up, and we are talking about that in terms, it's listed throughout the actions to reduce chemical pesticides and fertilizers. We haven't talked specifically about it yet, but it has come up.
Okay, great. So helpful to have a reminder.
There is an action in the initial climate action plan that talks to tracking and limiting the use of chemical pesticides, and some potential strategies to do so. But certainly something folks could look more at if they deem it a priority at this point.
Yeah. Zach, is that an old hand or a new hand?
It's just quick follow up to previous question hand, which is just to say that I recognize that this committee is doing a lot of work, and there's a lot of volunteers on this committee, and I'm really grateful for all the effort. What I wanted to just make really clear is that there is nowhere on the website right now that's showing any of these either new or prioritized ideas, pathways, goals. There is a list of what used to be or what is currently in the plan. And then, but for the public, I mean, just speaking for myself, it's challenging to know how to weigh in at a meeting like this, or with the subcommittee at an upcoming meeting, without being able to actually look at what you are all looking at. And again, not trying to cast any like blame or fault here. I'm just requesting that by the next Thursday meeting that you all just highlighted, which I look forward to, if there could be a document posted that describes those, I think it would be really helpful for just facilitating the conversation around all these topics. And if you are, my one comment, I guess, tonight is just to say, I didn't hear as much about demand reduction and emissions reduction. And the bedrock goal of the Global Warming Solutions Act is emissions reduction. And then there are co-benefits, of course, that can come along with that. But I heard a lot about kind of keeping things the way they've been. And I hope that in the conversation next Thursday and at the Climate Council, I mean, I'm looking forward to hearing more about how we're going to reduce emissions and keep more carbon from going into the atmosphere, because I'm just not seeing those dots being connected right now with what was shared tonight. But I really appreciate the presentation and look forward to the conversation next week. Thank you.
Thanks, Zach. So one thing I like to do when we finish up, and I'm going to throw something in the chat, and it's just a way, there's still 35 of us on the call right now, and I invite all of you to click on this link I'm dropping in the chat right now. And if you could just type just a few words. A short phrase is best. But what that link is going to ask you to do is answer the following question. It's going to say, based on the conversation we've had just now tonight, what is one piece of input that really jumps out as particularly important for this subcommittee? So a short phrase is best. A long phrase is hard to read, but a short phrase is best. And I'll start to show what you all write. But I just encourage all of you, before we sign off and go get dinner and go on with our evenings, just take a quick moment and think back to like all the key things that were said tonight. What's one that you really want to make sure subcommittee members don't forget? All right, and I see some stuff coming in. I will start to share my screen. Yep, you're seeing what I'm seeing. Right, and some are just doing it in the chat. That's fine too. Okay. Different views on the wood and energy conversation. I really appreciate folks dropping these in, right? You can see the themes that we've talked about come up here, right? Thank you for that. All right. And thanks for those who just dropped it in the chat as well. We'll put these in the notes. All right. So, Evan, could you do me a favor and pull up that last slide? So in addition to what Billy's already mentioned in terms of next steps, here's a few other things to keep in mind. Excellent. Thanks, Evan. You just dropped it right in the chat, and that's phenomenal. So you can link it better. So the Climate Action Office has a newsletter. It's a great way to stay in touch with what's going on with the Climate Council and other pieces of climate action that Vermont's doing. There's a calendar that we've referenced a couple times, which has meetings and should have meeting materials. And I take Zach's point that sometimes I was just looking back at the last Ag and Ecosystem meeting, and indeed there's some presentations and stuff that aren't up there right now that would be helpful to be up there. But that's where you can see all upcoming meetings of this subcommittee and others. And this comment form goes in, and there's a back piece to that, and it gets processed and sent out to the right subcommittees, those comments that come in. And there's even a voice message place if you want to, that's how you like to leave comment. So those are good ways to do it. As a reminder, the subcommittees, including this one, are being asked in December, to offer their recommendations to the council. Over the winter, the council is going to consolidate that from all the subcommittees, turn that into a draft updated climate action plan, send that out to public comment, and there'll be a number of engagement things happening during that public comment, like I said, probably in the April timeframe. So those are all key milestones to keep in mind. And there are many ways to plug yourself into this. And we really appreciate that people have different views about this. It's important to bring those different views to these processes. Okay, great. I think that's it. Billy, Jael, anything else from you?
Thanks everyone for taking the time to be here, and really encourage you to either reach out to Jael and I directly or use these tools to get us your kind of thoughts and written comments, because we're in crunch time now. We've got about 3 weeks remaining to wrap up our work and hand it off to the council. So whatever input we could get from you all during that window would be fantastic.
Super. Great. Thanks everyone. I think that's it.
Thank you.
Have a really good evening. Take care. We'll be in touch.
Thank you.